Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for joining the IOER Forum session of today. We are really glad to be able to hear a contribution today from someone who we would have liked to talk to in person earlier, actually, and to discuss about his work. Because it's a very interesting strand of research, and so we are very happy and very much welcome Professor Markku Sotarauta from the University of Tampere in Finland, where he is a professor of regional development studies in the Faculty of Management and Business. And where he has also in the past served indeed as the founding dean of the School of Management and as a dean of the Faculty of Economics and Administration. But I think to most of us, Markku Sotarauta is very well known for his writings on questions of leadership, of individual agency, change agency in innovation systems, and of institutional entrepreneurship in cities and in regions. And of course, this is what he has published extensively about, and that's also what we would like to discuss today, because that necessarily forms a critically important aspect of what the Leibniz-Institut of Ecological, Urban, and Regional Development is interested in, which is the sustainability transformation of cities and regions. So, very warm welcome to Tampere or Helsinki. Where are you exactly right now located?
I'm in Tampere. I live and work in Tampere.
Okay. Yeah, so very warm welcome. And I would thus hand over the floor to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for a kind invitation and introduction. It's a pleasure to join you and share some ideas around what we have been doing and some research results, and it will be a pleasure to hear your questions and comments. And my talk is titled Change Agency in City and Regional Development. And to start with, I have to say that we are studying a lot cities and regions, but in practice we are studying processes of change in the context of certain industries in certain cities and regions. So some of my colleagues call me heretic or something like that because I don't use the word city or region as often as I should perhaps. But still, I personally find it crucial that we have to understand what's going on in the cities. So there are a lot of space for all sorts of studies. But let us start with football. Germany is a great football country. Instead, not like Finland, that is not so great. We have been improving lately, but here in the picture, I hope you can see the picture. You can see Finland playing Spain a few years ago, and we often, well, not often, always struggle with the big countries, big footballing countries. And then we have a question: what could we do? Of course, there is plenty of knowledge available around the globe how to improve skills of players or the training systems or stadiums or whatever. There is no lack of knowledge. And I think we can source that knowledge quite well here in as well. We have been improving, but not so much. But then we have another option. We can change the playground. We can change the rules of the game. We can take the game of football to a swamp. Somewhere in northern Finland, they are every year, not this summer for obvious reasons, organizing a swamp world championships in football. And you can see what kind of game it is, and you can perhaps also imagine all those millions and millions of mosquitoes buzzing around the players. I don't know who usually wins. I have never been there by myself, but I have heard a lot of stories around it and about it. And I'm quite sure that Toros Rojos, España didn't win the world championship, and the reason is that the game is completely different. Still, you have a goalie, you have the strikers, you have more or less the same rules as in football, but the playground is different. And this is basically what I have been interested in for some time, sometimes using the concept of institutions, sometimes less so. But in our research, we are trying to understand how individuals, groups of individuals, organizations, group of organizations are working to change the institutions that are providing them the playground to play their development game or whatever. How the habits, conventions, routines are changed, and how we break from the past path, how do we break from our routine-like behavior? How do we have a new kind of normative assumptions, what we should do, what is acceptable, what is not, how we regulate these things, and how we change the regulation, and how we may change, and what people do to change the cultural cognitive institutions, in short, our thinking. And this is kind of a point of departure. Another point of the departure is that we have been studying innovation policy, innovation systems, stem cell, mechanical engineering, creative industries, all sorts of industries and activities in regions and cities in Finland and in other countries. And quite often we find people who are trying to innovate against the logics of institutional arrangements. So we quite often in our studies, and especially in policy discussions, we focus on what I have called top-down institutions. We take laws, we take all sorts of regulations, we take policies, and then we try to understand how they are implemented and how different organizations comply to them. But when studying these kind of things and being involved in them at regional and local level, it's not that simple at all, because there are a lot of conflicting institutions, there are conflicting funding mechanisms, there are conflicting norms about what should be done, what is reported, what is sanctioned, and so forth. And quite often, this kind of discussion ends up in a very traditional planning discussion. How should we implement plans or policies better? And I've been trying to say that we should improve the leadership and other capabilities at local level, so that local and regional level actors could navigate through the kind of a maze of institutions, because I don't believe that we can harmonize it ever. It will be as conflicting, hopefully less so, but it will be conflicting also in the future. I could tell you a lot of examples in Finland, how one ministry is saying something and the other saying something else, or how the universities are expected to work for the companies and cities and regions, basically the society. It's set in the law, but then our funding system is basically saying that don't do it. There is no money there. So there are kind of what should we be doing or not point of departure. Our studies on institutional change, many of the cases we have studied, so that in the end it's not the grand plan that have been implemented or somehow sophisticated designed policies that have been executed, but it's a kind of an evolving, muddling through phase by phase process. And then we are especially interested in who are doing and what. So I will talk about institutions without using much the concept anymore. I'll introduce our thinking around it using the Trinity of Change Agency model. We hope it will be theory one day. And I also reflect briefly, if we'll have time, on how the cluster and platform policy change we are seeing here in the Nordic countries, especially in Finland at the moment, is changing the way these processes are led and managed. I use some cases from the studies we are doing at the moment. They are both Nordic. We have done some European and more global research projects also, but these Nordic at the moment. the first one we are focusing on where and how the green economy is growing. Our assumption is that we need economic growth, but it should be sustainable. And a few words about that later. It's very extensive study covering Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, and we are 5 universities and 2 research institutes. And I use also 2 cases from another project we are doing with Swedes and Norwegians on why some small places in Norway, Sweden, and Finland are doing well against all the odds, and why some places are doing not so well, even though they might have some structures for it. But this is just to show you, I don't stay here, but we have done 20 case studies, or actually are doing some of them still, but most of them have been done, and we are covering the Nordic countries quite well. And there are all sorts of industries in different regions, from bioeconomy to greening of maritime industry and offshore industry, mobile phones, mining, mechanical engineering, etc. I used only a few cases, but I may reflect on this. But basically, we are asking what kinds of agency are required in greening regional development or promoting regional development. And I have to say that here in the north, I would say especially in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and to large extent also in Norway, the whole sustainability issue is very embedded in what we do. It's all over the place, and it's not something separate anymore, but it's always integrated to everything we do, either successfully or less so, but it's not questioned almost at all, including the main corporations. And what are the roles and how actors take the institutions for path development? And we are especially interested in change agency, how the new options are generated. And usually at city level, regional level, the power base people are acting on is quite limited. And then we are, of course, interested in how do the key actors and who are they amplify their limited power base. And especially in the leadership part, we are interested in the mobilization and coordination. And the whole ambition in this line of study is to see beyond normal system approach, beyond the normal focus on organizations, beyond normal planning cycles. And I have seen cases, especially in Finland, where some regions are very skillfully acting on all sorts of policies, kind of exploiting them. So in the best cases, national policies are not always policies to implement, but they are resource bases to implement regional or local strategy. And then the question is how they are leading these processes, how they have a kind of safety focus. Based on the work we have done earlier and based on quite an extensive literature review, I wrote together with Markku from Lund University an article where we tried to compile different types of change agency into kind of a one model. We are always debating, is it a model or theory? I would say it's a model that hopefully will become theory one day. But this is based on literature, especially. Now we are testing this kind of thinking and theory in these projects. I showed you this is kind of a skeleton or theoretical framework for us. And one thing one concept that has not been so extensively used in regional economic development studies or city development studies is institutional entrepreneurship. It has been mainly used in organizational studies, to some extent in economics, but it has not been a kind of a central concept, but it's emerging as such. And the basic idea is that there actually are actors who are taking risks, seeing opportunities not to make money, but to change the rules of the game, to change the playground. This is an interesting form of agency because quite often these actors are not rewarded, but somehow penalized. I know myself few people who have worked a lot to change, for instance, the university systems or some local systems, and in the end, the change has happened, but they have lost their work. And then it's the question, who are these people or groups of people or organizations and so forth, and what is their contribution to change? As Mark mentioned, I have been writing quite a lot about place leadership. It's also a fairly new concept. There is a huge, extensive literature on business leadership, political leadership, and so forth. And for some reason, in regional studies or geography or planning studies or policy studies, leadership has not so much focused on. And I've been quite surprised about that, because in many of the case studies, and I've also been involved in different development processes here in Finland and Sweden and some other countries, and quite often it's obvious that there are individuals or some groups that are influencing the thinking of the others, that are influencing how the networks are evolving, how the networks are mobilized, or how the play rules of the game are changed for some specific settings. But based on our studies, I would say that it's quite understandable that place leadership is not so widely discussed, because it's a form of hidden leadership. It's not visible because it's not about mayors doing something or somebody having an official position. Sometimes they are the leaders, but we are trying to identify those people who actually influence. I might say, this is semi-public thing, I think, but I would say that there are a lot of office holders, at least in our country up here in the north, that are having an office, but that are actually not influencing the wider spectrum of organizations for sustainable city development or whatever, and that's why they are not actually leaders in a sense, since we are talking about it. And then, of course, there is a huge literature on innovative entrepreneurship, how it's the crucial engine for driving change, and how innovative entrepreneurship is crucial in not only identifying opportunities, but creating them. But this is kind of a starting point. Now I use a few cases where I try to highlight the practices and also the roles of agency. The first case is Hiedenranta in Tampere. That's my home base. Tampere is the second city region in Finland in size. Huge city here, 400,000 inhabitants, kind of middle-sized in European context, but it's one of the, well, it's the fastest growing city at the moment in Finland. And Hiedenranta, it's a new residential district that is being built on the western side of the city center by the lake at the moment. There used to be it used to be an agricultural area. Then there was a pulp mill. If you remember one thing from my presentation, that is that there are pulp mills all over Finland and paper mills, not so much as there used to be, but there was a pulp mill that was closed in 2008. The city government bought the area 2014, and this is what they are planning at the moment. Well, not only planning, the soil has been cleaned and the planning is ongoing, but that's not what is interesting from change agency point of view. There are new areas built all over the world all the time. The city government is using the new residential area with potentially 20,000 inhabitants as a platform to induce, involve, invite all sorts of actors to think differently. And this is not my slide, this is what the city government by itself is using. And the idea is that the new residential area, and the ambition is to have 20,000 people living there and also thousands of jobs, and it should be totally carbon free. How? Nobody actually knows in detail. There are a lot of ideas, but as the city is treating it as an open innovation platform, the idea is that they are inviting innovative entrepreneurs, companies to be involved in thinking new eco-efficient solutions in that place, kind of new energy systems or whatever. It depends on who is involved. They are bringing their own ideas on that platform. And this is kind of an emerging thinking in Finland at the moment. And the inspiration comes from digital world, like Apple iPhones, where you have the Apple operating system, and then there are all sorts of app makers and all different kinds of players using or contributing to that platform, and that is what makes it as an ecosystem. And that kind of thinking is now becoming more and more popular here in Finland. And city government in Tampere is using this one residential area as a showcase, but also waste management system. There is one at the university integrating students to companies and so forth. And I'll try to explain a bit later what makes this kind of innovation platform thinking different and why it's also calling for new capabilities and leadership capabilities. Our university is having premises in this location now, and several courses have been organized with the city government and other stakeholders in that place. And in that way, also the students are contributing to the evolution of this place in non-pre-planned way. It's an open process. Another example for trying to highlight what's at stake here is bioeconomy in central Finland. Central Finland is a traditional Finnish forest region. Some 80% of the territory is covered by forest. In Finland as a whole, it's 70-75%. So we really are a forest country, as is Sweden also. I can remember one German member of the European Parliament once asking her Finnish colleague that how many forests do you have in Finland? And she was surprised to hear the answer, because the answer is one, because Finland is a forest. And that's why forest industry has been the cornerstone of the economy for a long time. And now leading companies are trying to move and are doing all sorts of things to move to bioeconomy. And the biggest investment so far took place, it was 4 or 5 years ago in northern part of central Finland, where Metsä Group, it's one of the big three, as we like to call them, opened a new bioproduct mill. And if in the Tampere case, the leadership is in the hands of city government and in certain individuals and groups there, and the idea is to involve all sorts of innovative, entrepreneurially thinking people on that platform. And there are some specific arrangements who are leading the processes for involvement. Here in central Finland, this process is clearly led. It's not about place leadership, but kind of an institutional leadership. It's led by the corporation. And the whole thinking is based on opening the bioproduct plan for other companies. There is, I don't know exactly the situation at the moment, but there is around 20 companies exploiting and contributing to that platform. And the core raw material is wood, of course. But then the companies are using the side streams waste from the other companies as raw material, kind of a standard industrial symbiosis thing. And Metsä Group, the corporation, took the lead to create the first ring in this kind of ecosystem. And now there is, of course, pulp production, cellulose, electricity, heat, biogas, biopellets, fertilizers, cheese, agricultural products, and distant heating. The heat is coming from that product mill to entire northern central Finland. And this again is that there is a core that is a platform, and then there are dedicated people and trying to lead the process to get as much as possible companies involved in exploiting and contributing to this kind of platform. Quickly, another example from Sweden that is more kind of a cluster-based thinking. It's the Värmland in Western Sweden, also very traditional forest region with a lot of leading companies. There are also several Finnish companies. You can see the green circles. There are companies like Valmet, Pöyry, Tieto, Stora Enso is half Finnish, and everybody who is involved in forest industry knows the names of these companies. It's kind of a who in forestry, so they are well-known players. So it's a very strong place in that. But in Sweden, they are of course struggling with the same issue as companies in Finland. That's the fact that we are using less paper than earlier, and they are basically doing exactly the same thing as in central Finland. They are trying to create processes where they are using the side streams of the others, but the way it's organized and how the process is led is quite different. In Finland, it was the creation of ecosystem was led by the corporation, and then the regional, local, and also the state governments have supported it extensively in different ways, both monetary, but especially building new roads and all sorts of things. And now in the second phase in central Finland, the process is how to expand the ecosystem is led by local and regional development agencies. So there is a clear sense of leadership there. Here, this is more traditional cluster in a sense that the regional government took the lead. Then they established a cluster organization called PP2, Paper Province 2, that is leading the process at the moment, and we have labeled it as a successful dating agency. But it's the idea is to pool the resources and capabilities of all these leading companies to see beyond the normal products of forest industry and to make them as ecological as possible. But this is very quickly some examples. I know that I didn't do details, but why leadership is becoming more and more important is that when we move from cluster policies to platform policies, if it's taken seriously, Sweden is a bit more in cluster policy side. Finland is moving to platform policy. In cluster policy, the programs were kind of fixed, and there were first an analysis of what clusters should be selected. Up here, it's always so self-evident what will be selected: information communication technology, metal industry, forestry, and so forth. And then there are predefined program-based objectives that different organizations are supposed to commit to work together to get some funding from the government, and then they are supposed to invest money by themselves, of course. In platform policy, the question is multitude of objectives. There is no one grand objective, but the idea is to respect and identify individual objectives, ambitions, and the platform can be basically anything. It's a question of strategic choice, and it can be from waste management to residential area to collaboration between universities and companies and so forth. And also who are to be involved. In cluster policies, there is usually some kind of pre-selection, which means that it's the main corporations and their research institutes, main universities, their research centers. But in platform policy, it's a kind of an open invitation and an endless series of negotiations. Who could be involved, who not, what is the contribution, and so forth. And in platform policy, the question is more about capability building for the future instead of selecting the best projects to implement the designed objectives. And this is changing the role of public actors quite a lot, because instead of kind of a traditional planning or policy formulation cycle, the question is about how to organize a co-creation process and separate it or lead it. And this is from one article we published last year, and we talked about embedded leadership or everyday leadership, where the work the people are doing at the grassroots is quite a lot about leadership without them actually knowing it is. They have to influence other people's thinking to get them involved. And if earlier the ambition was to build strong ties, kind of very enduring social capital, in platform policy, the thinking is here we could be very critical to emulate Silicon Valley to have a more dynamic, rapid change of who is involved, who is not, and the phase should be identified quicker. But my argument is that when we are moving to platform policy, and even though as most countries are not perhaps doing it, it is making the situations more complex, but at the same time more dynamic. To conclude a bit, I put some two cases in the interest of time, but here in the north, based on our 20 case studies, it's really difficult to identify or say that we are having individual institutional entrepreneurs. It's more like a collective thing. That's very Nordic, of course, to share the risk. And we have also tried to identify what are the opportunities that are pursued. And they are so self-evident in a way. They are obvious. They are the ones that are in global circulation. And in 18 or 9, it was 19 cases out of 20, the place leadership is strongly in the hands of either local government or regional government. And this is strikingly different from, for example, Australia. I have also done some studies with my Australian colleagues, compared place leadership in Australia and Finland, and up in the north, it's very much embedded in the public sector system, quite often in local government, while in Australia it's much more private, and usually place leadership is mobilized to criticize or attack public sector. It's more confrontational, while up here it's more like the place leaders are working to reach consensus. And that's why we are arguing that there are those leading innovative entrepreneurs who are quite often aligned with local or regional level leadership processes, and that are seeing and going beyond the authorizations that those people actually have. They are working kind of in between spaces. In our studies, we have also argued and identified the other roles, and what we are trying to do also is to show the academic community, of course, and policymakers that, for instance, triple helix metaphor is highly influential, arguing and saying that universities, public sector, and companies should collaborate. Yeah, why not? And then there are a lot of studies. But what are the roles, for instance, universities are taking in our cases? In some places, like in offshore windmills in Denmark, they have been in mentoring and vision broker roles. And one of our arguments is that in these cases, we really don't find any visionaries, but we find actors who are brokering visions that are in global circulation and localizing them in their regions so that they actually can be implemented. And I would say that that's essential part of place leadership. Taking the global discourse, making it local, that is influencing people quite a lot. It can be the local traffic company, publicly owned. It can be port authority. In one case, in Finland, the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra, is influencing local and regional level activities a lot by brokering visions and so forth. Also, universities are taking quite often mentorship roles. So what we are trying to show is that if we think organizations as blocks in the system, we don't see what roles they are playing. I have some colleagues in the UK and Norway who have studied whether universities are taking the leading roles, kind of place leadership roles in their respective places, and sometimes, yes, not often, quite often, critics, mentors, and vision brokers. And what we are trying to show that that's a very important role, and not perhaps as grand and visible as is often hoped for, but quite important. Now I skip 2 cases, so we have some time to discuss. But when we talk about ecological issues and sustainability, etc., in Denmark, Sweden, Finland especially, Norway is a bit different because of its high dependency on oil and gas. But still, in these countries, there is a general understanding that something must be done. It's embedded. It's kind of institutionalized, I would say. This is. I know that if I say this in Finland, my colleagues would challenge me. But of course, it's not everybody everywhere. But as a whole, it's more or less kind of a cognitive cultural institutions that we have to do something. Especially when looking this from innovative entrepreneurship point of view, there is an increasing demand for all sorts of engineering stuff, especially Finnish and Swedish and also Danish companies are very good at. So it's not only about doing good for the planet, but it's for business people, it's a good business. Especially in China and some other countries. And we have also seen that it's the same engineers that used to do more as efficient machines as possible. Now they are designing as ecological machines as possible. It's a kind of a transformation of their skills, but it's not as big as we quite often think. Public policies are sometimes a source of funding, but it's more like a legitimate context to discuss the roles of different actors. So it's not the planning implementation thing, but the forum for discussions. And the platform cluster thing is about amplifying the plans without this kind of legitimate thing from the public sector. All those actors who would like to influence don't have the base to do so. And as the last thing, what I tried to say in a very quick take is that sustainable city and regional development is about changing institutions. And all too often, many of the things we have studied and seen are touching only the surface. They are not changing the playground. We are wasting a lot of money because of that. Then our next argument is that we need to improve our capabilities in leading these kind of processes and to understand better the agency involved to make this all more effective. And I know that, for instance, Business Tampere, that is the development arm of city government and the neighboring municipalities, have done this kind of skill analysis, what they are good at, what they are not good at in handling these kind of overly complex processes where the roles are changing. And of course, the Trinity of Change Agency is not some kind of harmonic collections of actions, but it's a patchwork of action. But in the best places, there are people who are making more like a relay instead of breaking all the time. Sorry about running through over big things, but I just wanted to show what we are thinking and what kind of empirical studies we are doing. Just to our ambition is to open a slightly different view on things we have studied a lot and know quite well. But thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I try to answer. And after working at the university for a long time and being a professor, I answer anyway. So that's our trade and skill. But thank you.